For centuries, Native American warriors defended their lands against invaders. They resisted armies, settlers, and governments that pushed them to the edge of survival. And yet, in the late 19th century, thousands of those same warriors joined the U.S. Army. They became the very tip of the spear for the government that had once sought to destroy them. They were known as the Indian Scouts, trackers, fighters, and survivors whose knowledge of the land made them invaluable. But their story isn't simple. It's a story of loyalty, betrayal, survival, and impossible choices. Who were these men? Why did they fight for the same army that conquered their people? And what became of them when the wars ended? Let's find out. By the mid-1800s, the American frontier was a boiling cauldron. Settlers were pushing west, railroads were splitting open the land, and native nations were fighting back. The U.S. Army, stretched thin and unfamiliar with the terrain, had a problem. They couldn't track their enemies. That's when a strange alliance began. Army commanders realized that the only men who could out-track, outride, and outfight native warriors were other natives. It was General George Crook, one of the most respected frontier commanders, who truly embraced this idea. He believed Indian Scouts were essential, famously saying, "Without them, the army is like a blind man in a dark room." And he was right. Scouts could follow a trail across bare rock, sense ambushes before they happened, and find water in a desert where soldiers would die of thirst. But the question remains, why would native warriors join? For many, the decision was born of desperation. By the 1870s, many tribes had been forced onto reservations. Buffalo herds were vanishing. Starvation was a constant threat. For some, scouting meant survival. It meant rations for their families, a paycheck, and a chance to keep their warrior traditions alive, even if it was under the U.S. flag. Others saw it as a way to settle old tribal scores. The Apache, for example, had been in conflict with other tribes for generations. When offered the chance to scout against their rivals, some Apache warriors saw it as an opportunity. And then there were those who believed cooperation might protect what little remained of their people's way of life. It wasn't loyalty to the U.S. government, it was survival, strategy, and sometimes revenge. Perhaps the most famous Indian scouts of all were the Apache. Their knowledge of the desert was unmatched. They could travel 70 miles without water, follow faint tracks across sun-baked stone, and vanish into canyons like ghosts. During the campaigns against Geronimo in the 1880s, Apache scouts were absolutely crucial. Ironically, it was often Apaches who tracked down other Apaches. General Crook himself relied on them so heavily that he once admitted he would never have found Geronimo without them. One of the most legendary scouts was Apache Kid. Originally trusted by the Army, his story turned tragic. After a violent incident, he was imprisoned, escaped, and spent the rest of his life hunted as an outlaw. To this day, tales of the Apache Kid's treasure haunt the deserts of Arizona. The Apache Scouts earned respect from soldiers, but they were never fully trusted. They were both allies and outsiders, used when needed, discarded when not. It wasn't just the Apache. The Navajo Scouts also served between 1873 and 1895. Their skills were extraordinary. Some could identify a horse's rider simply by examining hoof prints. Others could tell how many days had passed since a campfire had burned just by the ash. These were skills no U.S. soldier could replicate. And yet, despite their service, Navajo Scouts lived under suspicion. They weren't granted the same respect or pensions as white soldiers. The Army used their skills, but society never truly welcomed them. One of the most haunting aspects of the Indian Scouts is the moral battlefield they lived on. Imagine being an Apache Scout ordered to track down Geronimo, who may have been your cousin, your uncle, or even your brother. For some, it was unbearable. For others, it was simply survival. Better them than me. And yet, bonds did form between scouts and U.S. soldiers. Officers often admitted that they trusted their native scouts more than their own men. Scouts would ride ahead, risking their lives in ambush country. They were the eyes and ears of the Army, the difference between survival and annihilation. Still, when the campaigns ended, recognition was rare. By the 1890s, the Indian Wars were coming to an end. The frontier was closing. Tribes were confined to reservations, and the army no longer needed native scouts. Some stayed with the military in small numbers, but most were released back to their reservations. For many, this return was bitter. They had risked their lives for the U.S. Army, but when pensions were handed out, most were denied. Some had no recognition at all. In 1914, the last officially enlisted Indian Scouts were discharged. Their role in shaping the West quietly faded into obscurity. The story of the Indian Scouts is layered with irony. They were warriors who once stood against the U.S. Army and yet later rode beside it. They fought alongside the very institution that dismantled their homelands and broke their nations. They were trackers and hunters whose eyes could read the land like an open book, guiding soldiers through hostile terrain and leading them to victory. Yet, true victory, freedom, security, or recognition was something the Scouts themselves were rarely granted. And still, their role cannot be erased. Without their skill, courage, and knowledge of the land, the U.S. Army's conquest of the West would have taken much longer, perhaps even failed in key moments. Their story is not one of simple betrayal or blind loyalty. It is a story of survival in impossible times, of men forced to choose between two hard paths, and of how history sometimes leaves people no choices at all. In fact, 16 Indian Scouts were awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. Among them was William Alcasay, an Apache Scout, celebrated for his courage, loyalty, and role in bringing Geronimo to surrender. Their bravery was recognized at the highest level, even if their people's freedom was not. Today, remembering the Indian Scouts forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about war, about identity, and about what it means to fight for a nation that never fully accepted you. The Indian Scout stood at the crossroads of two worlds, native and American, warrior and soldier, freedom and survival. They are often remembered as traitors by some, heroes by others. But the truth lies somewhere in between. They were men caught in the tides of history, forced to choose between extinction and adaptation. And their choices changed the shape of the American West forever. So the next time you think of the Indian Wars, remember this: the U.S. Army did not conquer the West alone. It was guided step by step, trail by trail, by the very people it sought to defeat. This is the forgotten story of the Indian Scouts. Stay with us, because history is never as simple as it seems. And for more untold stories from the shadows of the past, don't forget to subscribe to Timeless Realms.